I'm 41, divorced, and raising my 17-year-old daughter Lila on my own. Things haven't been easy, but we've built a decent life after my ex walked out 7 years ago. Lila's always been a bit reserved, not shy exactly, just private. But she's smart, artistic, and fiercely independent, so I never pushed too hard when she kept things to herself. I figured it was just a teenage phase. A few weeks ago she mentioned a new girl at school named Marin, said she'd just moved here from out of state, didn't know anyone, and Lila had kind of taken her under her wing. She made it sound casual, no big deal. I didn't think twice about it. Kids make friends, right? But then things started to get strange. Lila started staying, not crazy late, just later than her used to. She stopped coming to the kitchen evenings to chat while I made coffee. She stopped about her day altogether. When I asked her what she and weirdly vague, just walking around. I didn't press it but something about the way she said Marin's name, like she was watching her reaction every time she said it. Then one night I came home from work early and heard voices upstairs. Lila's room door was cracked open just enough that I could hear her whispering, almost pleading, then silence. I knocked, and she opened the door quickly, a little too quickly. Her room was empty. When I asked who she was talking to, she said it was no one. She was just watching something, but I knew that wasn't true. The window was open, and I swear I saw a shadow disappear past the tree outside, like someone had just climbed down. That was the first night I really started to feel unsettled. That night, I barely slept. I couldn't shake the image of that shadow slipping past the window, or the edge in Lila's voice when I asked who she was talking to. She wasn't scared exactly. She was guarded, like she was protecting something, or someone. The next morning, I decided to check the backyard. I walked the perimeter, looking for anything that might tell me if someone had really been out there, and sure enough, right beneath Lila's window, the flower bed was crushed. Not just stepped on, flattened, like someone had landed there. I confronted her that evening, asked her point blank if Marin had been in the house. She didn't even flinch, just gave me this deadpan. Why would she be? And went back to scrolling on her phone. No anger, no fear, just this strange indifference that made my skin crawl. That's when I realized I didn't even know this Marin girl. I'd never met her, never seen her. Lila never brought her home. No pictures, no social media tag, nothing. So I asked the school counselor to call me during lunch break the next day. I told her I was just doing a casual check-in, wanted to know how Lila was doing, adjusting, staying on track for college. I also asked casually if she'd heard anything about Lila's new friend. She hesitated. Then she said, "You mean the girl from art class? The one who's kind of intense?" I asked her to explain. She said Marin had only been at the school for about a month. Showed up mid-semester with almost no records, just a faxed transcript from a school in Colorado. Nothing about her medical history, disciplinary files, nothing. The counselor said she tried to follow up, but the contact number for the school was disconnected. I asked if the school had verified her guardian. She told me Marin's paperwork listed an aunt as her emergency but no one had ever actually. I hung up the phone, my heart pounding. I didn't know what freaked me out more, the fact that Lila had gotten so close to this girl in such a short time, or that no one, including the school, seemed to know. But that wasn't the worst of it. That night, Lila said she had a project and stayed up. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the creak of the stairs. I figured maybe she was getting a snack, but then I heard the front door open, softly, carefully, like someone was trying not to wake me. I waited, counted every second. Then I slipped out of bed and crept down the hallway barefoot, peering through the dark toward the front entry. The door was wide open, and Lila was gone. But that wasn't all. Something was sitting on the hallway table near the door. Something that hadn't been there earlier. A single Polaroid photo of me, asleep, in my bed. I didn't touch the photo at first. I just stared at it, frozen. The shot was taken from the doorway of my room, far enough that whoever took it had to zoom in or lean in, which meant someone had been inside my room while I was sleeping. The air felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. I finally picked up the photo with shaking fingers. There was no writing on the back, just the glossy surface and my own unaware face staring back at me. I locked the door, double-checked every window, and texted Lila. No answer. I didn't want to call and scare her. At least, that's what I told myself. But deep down, I think I was afraid of what I'd hear in the background. She answered. I sat on the couch with all the lights on, clutching my phone and that photo until nearly 3:30 a.m., when I finally heard the front door creak open. Lila slipped in like a ghost, her shoes in her eyes wide when she saw me awake. She didn't say anything, just froze in place like a kid caught sneaking in a party. I asked her. She shrugged and said she couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m. in our neighborhood? I held up the. She didn't react, though shock and expression. She said something. I knew you'd. The photo wasn't she wanted me to see it. I asked her, "Did you take this?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned around and walked upstairs like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, door locked, lights on, the photo lying face down on the table. By morning, I was so exhausted and paranoid that I started second-guessing myself. Maybe she didn't mean it the way it sounded. Maybe she didn't take the photo. Maybe someone else did. Someone connected to Marin. Someone already inside our lives. I decided I needed to know more about this girl, not through Lila, on my own. So that afternoon, while Lila was still at school, I went into her room. I told myself I had the right. She was my daughter, and I had to protect her, but it still felt like I was breaking into someone else's life. The room was spotless, too spotless, like it had been cleaned recently, and carefully, but tucked inside her sketchbook, under a page filled with graphite trees and inked shadows, I found something strange, a piece of paper folded into a tight square. When I opened it, I found 5 words written in tiny, neat handwriting. She's not who you think. That was it. No name, no date, no explanation, just those 5. And suddenly, I wasn't just worried about Marin I was starting to. My daughter was hiding something darker. I couldn't stop staring at that note. She's not who you think. I read it again and again, trying to figure out whose handwriting it was. It wasn't Lila's. Hers was messier, loopier. This was deliberate, clean. It felt like a warning. From who? I sat on Lila's bed for a long time, debating whether to dig deeper. A part of me felt like I was crossing a line, but another part, the part that had found a photo of myself sleeping and watched my daughter walk in at 3 a.m. like it was normal, knew that line was long gone, so I kept looking. It didn't take long to find something. Behind her bookshelf, tucked in the narrow space between the wall and the wood, was a black composition notebook with no label, the kind you'd overlook unless you were deliberately searching. Inside were dozens of entries, but none of them were in Lila's handwriting. The entries weren't dated. Some were just phrases or scattered thoughts. Others were long, sprawling pages that read more like journal entries. Some of the handwriting seemed unstable, like whoever was writing was agitated, spiraling. One page in particular stopped me cold. It said, "She's going to figure it out soon. We shouldn't have picked her daughter. We were supposed to wait." That's when I realized these entries weren't written to someone. They were written between 2 people. Whoever had this notebook was sharing it, passing it back. I flipped further and found more disturbing phrases. "She asks too many questions. Lila says she doesn't remember what happened. I think she's lying. Don't leave anything in her room again. She almost found the other photo." Other photo? I slammed the notebook shut, heart racing. What was going on? And why was my daughter's name in the middle of it? I was still gripping the notebook when I heard the garage door open. Lila was home. I shoved it back behind the shelf, barely managing to make the bed look untouched before I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She poked her head into my room like something was wrong, asked if I wanted sushi for dinner. I nodded, forcing a smile, and for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't know my own child. Not anymore. That night, I told her I wasn't feeling well and stayed in my room with the door locked. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just sat there trying to process what I'd read. We shouldn't have picked her daughter. Picked her for what? And who was the we? I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening, it had started before I even knew Marin's name. Maybe before she even showed up at the school. Maybe it wasn't about her at all. Maybe it was about me. The next morning, I called in sick to work and went back to the school, not to talk to the counselor this time, but the front office. I wanted to see Marin's file with my own eyes. They gave me the usual pushback, citing privacy policies, but when I said I was concerned for my daughter's safety, they finally let me speak to the vice principal. He agreed to show me the basics: emergency contact, transfer records, enrollment documents. But the moment he opened the file, he frowned. It was empty. No transcript, no ID photo, just a scanned enrollment form that looked wrong. It had a name, a date of birth, an address in Colorado, but the font on the form didn't match the school's system. The emergency contact was blank, and the guardian's signature. When I asked him how she was enrolled, he said he assumed the office clerk had verified. The office clerk had retired 2 weeks ago. The only person who handled Ma's enrollment, gone. I left the school with my head spinning. This girl was off in ways I couldn't explain. And it wasn't just me seeing it. There were gaps, paper trails that didn't line up, signs that someone had intentionally slipped her through the cracks. On a hunch, I drove to the address listed on her paperwork. It was only a couple hours away, and I needed answers. I needed proof. But when I got there, I found a boarded-up house. Windows shattered, front door padlocked, and spray-painted on the wall in giant red letters. "We don't live here anymore. Stop asking." I stood frozen on the sidewalk, heart pounding. I hadn't said a word to anyone. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. But someone already knew I would, and they wanted to back off. I drove home with my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I couldn't stop glancing in the rearview mirror. At every red light, I looked behind me, convinced someone was following. No one was. At least, not that I could see. But that feeling, that icy tension in my spine, never left. When I got back, the house was quiet. Lila was still at school, and for a moment everything looked normal. But when I went to the kitchen to pour a glass of water, I saw it, sitting on the counter like it had always belonged there. Another Polaroid. This time, it was of me, standing outside the boarded-up house. Taken today. I dropped the glass. It shattered across the tile floor, and I didn't even flinch. Whoever was doing this wasn't just watching me. They were ahead of me. They knew where I was going before I did. They weren't just messing with Lila. This was about me, too. And that's when I realized something I hadn't thought about in over 20 years. There was another girl. Not Maren, not Lila, someone from my past. I hadn't said her name in decades, not since high school. We were inseparable back then, me and a girl named Cassidy. We had secrets, dangerous ones, things no one else knew. And then, one night, she disappeared. Gone. No note, no call, just gone. Everyone thought she'd run away, but I knew she hadn't, because I'd seen what happened. I just didn't tell anyone, and I thought it was over. Until now, because suddenly, something clicked in my brain. Maren, she didn't look like Cassidy. Not exactly. But the eyes, the mouth, the way she watched people, it was too familiar, too calculated. Could it be possible? Could she be Cassidy's daughter? I pulled out my old high school yearbooks from the hall closet and flipped through pages with shaking hands until I found the picture. Cassidy in 11th grade, half smiling, hair dark, head tilted slightly like she was already in on some secret. Then I flipped back to Lila's last class photo from this year. There, 3 rows up and 2 students over, was Maren, smiling the exact same way. Same tilt, same look in her eyes, like she'd already won. I couldn't breathe. The resemblance was no longer a theory. It was undeniable. Maren looked just like Cassidy, and that smirk in the yearbook photo? It wasn't a coincidence. It was intentional. This wasn't some random girl who befriended my daughter. She found us. She found me. I stared at Cassidy's photo, heart hammering, and that night came rushing back, one I've tried to bury for half my life. We were 16. There was a fight, in the woods. Just the 2 of us. She'd found out something about my family, something I was never supposed to talk about. We argued. She ran off, and I never saw her again. But I did hear her scream. I told the police we lost track of each other, that I tried to find her, but she was gone. Everyone believed me, including my parents. But now, someone clearly hadn't forgotten or forgiven. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, yearbook in one hand, Polaroid in the other, waiting for Lila to come home, but she never did. At 2:14 a.m., my phone lit up. Blocked number. I let it ring. Then it buzzed with a voicemail. I played it on speaker. A girl's voice. Calm. Measured. Not Lila's. She said, "I'm not here to hurt her. I just want you to remember what you did. You let her die. You didn't stop it. And now? Now you'll understand what it's like to watch someone vanish." Then silence. I hit redial. No answer. I called Lila. Straight to voicemail. And that's when I realized this was never about revenge. It was a message, and my daughter was the delivery. By morning, I was unraveling. I called every one of Lila's friends, even the ones she hadn't talked to in months. No one had seen her. Her phone was still off. Then, just before noon, I heard the garage door open. She walked in like nothing had happened. I ran to her, demanding to know where she'd been. She looked exhausted, eyes puffy, hair a mess, but calm. She said, "You should have told me about Cassidy." The words hit like a punch. I asked her how she knew. She told me Maren had already explained everything, that Cassidy had been her mother, that she'd grown up never knowing the truth, just stories, whispers, pieces. But one day, she found an old letter hidden in a book, written by Cassidy to me. A letter I never received, or maybe never found. And that letter? It said I wasn't the only one there that night in the woods. Someone else followed us. Someone who had just as much to lose if Cassidy told her secret, and that someone was my mother. I stood there speechless. Leila stared at me with something like betrayal in her eyes, but not anger, hurt. She told me Maren hadn't come to destroy us. She came to find answers. Closure. She needed to know who left her mother in the woods that night. And now, so did I. Because I remembered something I hadn't let myself think about in years. That night, after Cassidy ran, I'd gone back home. My mother was already standing in the kitchen, pale and stiff, like she'd been waiting. I told her Cassidy and I had a fight. I told her Cassidy knew something. She didn't say a word, just nodded. The next morning, Cassidy was gone. I'd convinced myself it was just timing, just a horrible coincidence. But it wasn't. Lila said Maren had found medical records, ones that proved Cassidy had been pregnant when she disappeared. She was going to tell. That was the secret, and maybe my mother knew what that would mean. For Cassidy's family, for mine, for me. I don't know what she did. I don't know how far she went, but she's been dead for 6 years now, and I think I finally understand why she never wanted me to talk about that night. Lila moved out a week later. She said she needed space, and honestly, I didn't blame her. I haven't heard from Maren since. No more Polaroids, no more warnings, just silence. But every time I look in the mirror now, I see Cassidy's face in my own, and when I look at Lila, I see a new story, one where secrets don't stay buried, one where the truth always finds its way back, even if it takes 17 years.